Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. Today's guest, Robert Kopecky, has quite an interesting background. He was a ski bum, a factory welder, a monumental sculpture fabricator, an underground cartoonist, and finally, an award-winning Manhattan illustrator, art director, and animation designer for clients like The Times, Cartoon Network, and PBS Kids, most well known for Sesame Street and some of their animation. So why is he on my show? What landed him here? Well, it was 3 near-death experiences early in his life that really transformed how he lived. And he began writing spiritual essays as a result of these near-death experiences when he finally accepted them for what they were, and was channeling this wisdom, and it caught on, and people started being curious about what his experiences were and what happened. And he wrote 2 books. One is How to Survive Life and Death, and the other, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. And today on this show, we talk about his near-death experiences, which are incredible. The fact that he survived 3. He's the second person I've spoken to recently who had 3 near-death experiences. So clearly someone's trying to clobber him over the head with some sort of message. But it was a really heartwarming conversation, and you hear from him. First of all, he just embodies really what it means to be present in this moment. And I think that there are I've interviewed many guests in the show, many people with all different types of energy. And particularly with near-death experiencers, one of the things I notice is that there's a particular calm to them. And I don't think I embody that calm, but they certainly embody that calm. And Robert was one of those people where there was just an ease and a calm and a knowing to everything that he talked about and everything that he said. And his stories were captivating in how he described these experiences with these beings that he encountered in his near-death experiences, and how he brought those experiences back into his everyday living. Because I think that that's always the hardest part, and the part that I'm always so curious about is we have these spiritually transformative experiences. What do we then do about them, and how do we integrate them in how we live? So I think you are going to love this week's episode. It was juicy until the very last, until I turned off the recording, and then it was juicy after that. I wish we would have had the ability to record our post conversation, because we went deep in sort of what I'm doing and my own transformation and how that's feeling right now. But for you all, here is today's episode with Robert Kopecky. Welcome, Robert, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Thank you very much, Amy. It's a privilege to be here.
So, first of all, last night, as I was getting ready to read these books, I like to read everything. Obviously, I was a little late in doing so, but last night I'm laying in bed and I'm getting to these, and I said to my son, they were sitting far away, and I said, could you grab me those books that are over there? And he looked at them and he read to me, How to Survive Life and Death? How to Get to Heaven? What are you reading, Mom?
Without really dying.
Right, without really dying, exactly. And I love A Guide for Happiness in This World and Beyond by someone who died 3 times. So,
in matter of speaking, yes.
Right. So why don't we start there? Because my audience loves to hear the near-death experience stories, because I think they do give us so much hope for what is on the other side of this life. So can you walk us through these 3 incredible stories? I know you were less impressed with some of them than others, but if you could tell us what happened to you.
Sure. Yeah. When stuff happens to you, it's a little, sometimes it doesn't seem as big a deal as it might to somebody else. And in this case, I had come to live with these experiences really before they soaked in. In other words, I kind of suppressed them for a long time. And as a result, living in denial that way, you can't really explore what has actually happened until you open up to it. And that's what happened to me. But my first near-death experience happened, let me just say, I had 3 of them. They were within about a 12-year period or so, kind of evenly spaced, between 1985 and 97, in that range there. In my first near-death experience, I had driven my wife at the time. I was living in Los Angeles, and I was working as an illustrator, an art director, and these jobs I had during my regular career. And I dropped my wife off at the airport, and I came back home on a different route. And I was cutting through a neighborhood I was unfamiliar with, and it was evening. And this will tell you how long ago it was. I had a malfunction with my cassette player in my car.
I know, I love that, because I could totally appreciate the image that you describe.
Yeah, that immediately gets rid of a lot of your audience when it comes in terms of being able to relate to
They're
that.
like, what's a cassette player?
Yeah, but if the tapes got gobbled up sometimes, and you'd eject the button and there'd be a long strand of tape and stuff. And I was fussing with that for a minute, and I glanced off an oddly parked car. I was going about 35 miles an hour or so, and I went right into a utility pole. And boom.
And we thought cell phones were dangerous, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, it was kind of the equivalent of that, not paying attention, obviously. And just like that, I found myself at the top of this utility pole, essentially at the level of the utility pole. And I was looking down, at first I was looking around because I could look over hedges and into people's yards and stuff like that. So I was naturally peeping into people's backyards and junk like that. And then I looked down and I realized that was my car, and that there was somebody hanging out of the driver's side of it. There was fluid pouring onto the ground, and there was steam roiling up from it. It was caved in the front end. The windshield was broken. And I realized that it was me. And I started to see people's porch lights go on and stuff. Like I said, it was the evening, and people started running out, having heard the collision, the impact. And somebody hollered, "Get an ambulance," and there were people gathering around. And I was immediately, I was fine. In fact, I was beyond fine. I felt fantastic. I felt wonderful. I felt liberated. I felt enfolded in love, which is, I can talk about it a little bit more, the things that are in common between my 3 near-death experiences and all the other ones that I've heard since. But this sense of a sort of transcendent unity and being enfolded in love, and of not being alone. I felt that I wasn't alone. I felt like there was somebody with me, kind of behind my shoulder. And as I took it all in, I tried to sort of, levitate downwards, if you could say that, and communicate with people. But they were taking me out of the car and putting me into the back of the ambulance. And I witnessed all of this. I was not able to communicate with anybody in actual.
Were you frustrated? Do you recall being frustrated that was?
A little bit, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Because I think I was still, at that point, a part of me was attached to that material aspect where frustration enters into the picture. Shortly after that, I was just kind of awestruck, I think. But this is an interesting thing about it, because I was me. I don't remember being able to look at my hands or having a sense of my body at all. And I had this sense of not having any boundaries, kind of like having spread out much larger and overlapping, or being, like I said, enfolded into something. But then I had this like apparent entity, sort of like a guardian angel, I call it now, basically, who shepherded me off. It's like, it's time to go. And moved me through what I can only describe now as a sort of a big gray cloud bank. I don't remember the exact travel, but I do remember being then in a very pastoral place, in a very beautiful park-like place, or in nature, and undergoing this kind of really congenial and comfortable interview, kind of like right now. with with who I couldn't tell you.
Maybe this is heaven.
I couldn't tell you who it was with, though. I can see your features perfectly, but I can't recount to you exactly the features of the entity that I was being interviewed by. Just that it was important, that there were important things being hashed out. And I'd lost sense of time until I woke back up, back in my body, in a hospital, in a bed hooked up to machines, and with a big bandage around my head and stuff, and a nurse there. And it had been about 20 hours or so that I had been completely unconscious. So I call this, in my second book in particular, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying, perspective, the gift of spiritual perspective, where ever since then, I mean, once I finally came to terms with having had these, like I said, I'd suppressed them, really, these experiences. Once I came to terms with it after practicing meditation for a number of years, and it's flooded all back, I realized that, that what we call birth is getting this body, and what we call dying is leaving this body. And so, body, no body, what's the difference? We're alive in this moment, and wherever we are. Mm-hmm. And that enabled me then to kind of align myself with a whole different set of priorities, so to speak, where I don't have to be so engaged in all the hard parts of life. Most of them are difficult not to be engaged in, but it's not necessary. Mm-hmm. I can compassionately detach from those. So that's my first near-death experience, which was an out-of-body. It's a typical motif.
I'm just going to take notes because I have a million questions, but I want to hear all of them to see if there's a thread that, rather than, otherwise we'll end up down 17 rabbit holes. So keep going.
Yeah. The second one was some years later, and I was leading a pretty riotous lifestyle in downtown New York City. I was fairly nocturnal. I'd had a marriage end, and in between these, it's pretty interesting. A lot of things were not going right for me. I was
after the first near-death experience,
yeah,
which was the wife you dropped off.
Yes,
and then you divorced from her.
Exactly, right. And
how old were you at the first experience?
I was 27, so thereabouts.
Okay.
Yeah, 27 or so. And so things had not really been going very well because I was commercially, I was very successful. Professionally, I was very successful.
Tell us what you did, because it's so interesting. I know you alluded to it before, but...
Oh, yeah. At that time, I was an underground cartoonist. Mostly, I was a commercial illustrator, and I was illustrating for... illustration was a different thing then, because you could do album covers, or you could do double-page spreads in magazines. I worked for a Playboy and New York Magazine and Business Week and all kinds of the LA Times, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, all that kind of stuff. I was doing illustrations all the time.
So just a normal guy having some near-death experiences on the side.
Yeah, well, I had never had to learn how to draw as a kid. I could just do it. So I kind of didn't have much choice when it ended up like, how are you going to make a living? I could do that. People wanted me to do that. So that made it kind of a no-brainer for me. So anyways, I was living this not the greatest lifestyle, and I ended up just having a meltdown. And I kind of like fell out on the floor of my apartment after a particularly wild string of wild parties or whatever. And I was living with somebody else at the time. And I collapsed on the floor, and everything from the neck down just went numb. And I was laying there, looking up into the room, and the room filled in with a bright cloud, like a white cloud. Just brilliant, radiant illumination, kind of, which is another thing that a lot of near-death experiencers have, along with being enfolded in love. And once again, I felt that feeling of that sort of transcendent unity, and of more connectedness, like boundaries disappearing. And again, I was not alone, or I did not feel alone. And I had this entity again, who I now know pretty well and stuff over the years.
But didn't know at the time between the first and second.
No, because I had been living in absolute denial, really. I was not living like a near-death experiencer in between these two. I just put it out of my mind completely. I had mentioned it to a couple of people at different times, and nobody really wanted to hear that much about it. They weren't that interested. They just thought I was being crazier than usual, you know. So I was directed to look like over here, kind of, and a screen of sorts opened up in this illuminative cloud. There was almost like a window or a box of time, like into scenes from my life. And this likewise is a motif that you'll hear a lot of times, a life review that takes all different forms in near-death experiences. The form it took in my life was that I was in front of this panel that opened up, and then it went in. I could almost step into it and experience these moments from my life that were not, I like to say, not the greatest hits. These were times that I would not have considered up until that point as having been particularly important even. But being present for them with that kind of intense focus that I had at that moment and being part of it again, I recognized them as being times when I had made decisions or when I had injured somebody, you know, without even thinking about it. When I'd been so unconscious in my life that opportunities had passed me by, or that I had created karma that I had then been living with, kind of. And so there was this, this presence that I experienced. And the realization then came to me when this settled in on me some years later, that we're always living in this moment. We always have, we always will, whether we're on this side or on the other side, if you want to call it that, we're here now. And now is when I have the opportunity to make of my life what I will, to create or address karma that I accumulated or going forward, you know. So that was, I call that the gift of presence, that second one.
And how old were you for that one?
Oh boy, that was about, let me see, I was like 32 or 33, something like that, around then. Because it was about five years later or so, something like that. So my third one, we'll get them all out of the way. I do always like to point out that it takes more for some people to get it. And in my case, it definitely did, because I still did not really recognize, I hadn't heard much about near-death experience. I didn't recognize this as being a typical motif for near-death experiences or anything like that. And I really wanted to get past it and get on with my life, which I did.
Were you shaken up by both the physical aspect of these experiences or the emotional, or did you really repress the emotional aspect of it and just try to deny that these spiritual experiences happened for you?
Yeah, well, like I said, in the first one, I had tried to discuss it and it went nowhere. And so I thought I better drop it. And I moved on to regular life. In this one, it changed everything in my life. I mean, I gave up my relationship. I gave up my apartment in Manhattan, which is a big deal if you're living in Manhattan, you know. And I moved to the desert Southwest. I moved to Arizona. I'm from San Diego originally, so it was a little bit like going home. But I completely changed everything. And I still was not conscious. I didn't experience enough consciousness to know why I was doing that, or to really sit and rationalize, okay, I've had this experience. Now I know more about what's going on. I have to figure this out. I wasn't like that at all. I was still just doing what I thought I needed to do at the time. And I ended up having a relationship with somebody in a small town in Arizona, a university town in Arizona. And it was Super Bowl Sunday, and we had gotten engaged, and she was at her place baking, and I was watching the Super Bowl with some friends at a big sports bar near the university. And when the game ended, I went out, and again, this dates me because I used a payphone, and I called her up when she was back at home baking, and told her when I'd be back. And I was assaulted while I was on the phone by what we called skinheads, like a big kid with a shaved head and like early tattoos, maybe before the tattoo craze really happened. And he was inebriated, and he was very aggressive. And I had just come from New York City, so I looked a little urbane, maybe for the location in Arizona. And he started calling me names and assaulted me. And he reached in and he hung up the phone while I was talking. He just reached in and hung it up. And I talked him down, and I relaxed him, and he went away. And I got back on the phone with my fiance. And he came back, and he was even more aggressive, and he was really assaulting me. And I had grown up as a martial artist, which was kind of an inroads to a spiritual life, I think, but I didn't know it. And I planted my back foot, and I punched him right on the chin and knocked him flat on his back. And the people around me were like applauding because this guy had been obviously so aggressive and terrible. And I didn't realize that there were a van full of his buddies that had been waiting for him to come out to the curb, and they witnessed that. So I sort of like made good my escape. I had ridden a bicycle, and I went up and I got my bike, and I was riding back to my fiance. And I didn't realize these guys were following me in the van, and they pulled up alongside of me. And it hit me in the back of the head with like a tire iron or a crowbar, something like that, and knocked me unconscious and head first into the curb. And I was out then for 3 or 4 hours. And I didn't know until I got the police report almost 2 years later that these guys had been getting in and out of their van and stomping and kicking me. Where I was in that third near-death experience was I was, again, enfolded in love. I was free of that yet, but in this instance, there was more of a sense of something happening outside of the room that I was in, so to speak. It was very womb-like in a way, and this is a pretty appropriate metaphor if it wasn't a reality that I was in. I had a sense of something going on out there that was bad. And I was surrounded by the personages of a sort of heavenly type. Again, I don't remember exactly what they looked like. I just remember that there was a sense of this transcendent unity and of being completely loved and supported. And they were telling me that I needed to go back. And I did not want to go back. And this, again, is another thing that happens to a lot of near-death experiencers. This like, no, I'm fine here.
I was going to ask, because you didn't talk about the first 2 times. That was one of my questions is, did you have a choice? Yeah,
I did not in those first 2 ones. It didn't really happen that way. In the second one, I started to hear my girlfriend shouting, and the cloud dissipated, and I was back in the room. In this one, I didn't have a choice again, but I wish I had. I was telling them, no, I want to stay here. I'm done with that. And they were like, no, you're not done with that. So I don't remember the specific course of the conversation.
Because I've heard some people literally do have the choice to say, like
right.
They'll say, do you want to choose to stay or go back?
Yes, a lot of people.
And some people can choose.
Right.
Obviously, they make the choice to come back because they're here to tell me about that choice. So
right.
I don't know what happens to the other people.
Well, and I just wanted to say something about the nature, too, of memory, because I've heard hundreds and hundreds of near-death experiences now. And I've heard the same person tell their experience over the course of years, and sometimes it changes. And so I'm not really convinced of the reliability of memory. And if quantum physics suggests that this is an observer-based reality and we're kind of manufacturing everything anyway, then we're manufacturing our memory too. So I try to keep it as spare as possible when I recount these experiences as to what I remembered when I remembered it at that time. It's very possible that I had the choice to come back in that one. Mm-hmm. I just wasn't aware of it, or I haven't accessed that yet, even, because one thing that was clear is that time was not linear anymore. And so you're just kind of awash in this whole set of different potentialities when you're on the other side, as it were, where sort of anything can happen, I think. And that's what I attribute all the different near-death experiences to, is that we each carry this package of sort of karmic data that we are into whatever life that we're into, and it essentially activates what we experience, and it's custom made for us. Near-death experiences seem to be custom made. So for me, this activated more of a sense of purpose. And then after that, I felt like I was pushed through a membrane and like popped out the other side. And I opened my eyes and I was laying on the street with an emergency medical worker over me who said, "He's back." And it had been about 3.5 hours or something like that. It took me to a hospital, and that was really difficult to recover from because I'd suffered a lot of physical damage. I had all kinds of broken bones and stuff. So that was my least favorite near-death experiences as they go.
If we're going to rank them as most favored to least and most powerful to least, right? Like I love in the book, you were like, I'm not going to tell this one. I didn't want to tell this one because it didn't seem that great of a near-death experience.
Well, sometimes they're kind of embarrassing, or mine have been a little bit. You don't really want to punch out a skinhead. That's not a smart thing to do. That's the big lesson. And I never have again. Trust me, I never will. Because a lot of things started to become more clear to me. And it's funny because the material aspects of life really started to completely disintegrate for me at that point. Kind of everything I thought I was and thought I was supposed to be, and the relationships that I'd had, they didn't matter anymore. I was kind of like an egg without a shell, know.
Yikes.
And so I sort of slowly crawled back into it, and I had all of these wonderful opportunities kind of open up to me to return from Arizona back to New York. And then I started working in I was just invited to start working in animation design. And I started designing shows for Cartoon Network and PBS Kids, and ultimately some work for Sesame Street, and designing shows for other creators and stuff like that. So I had this whole different calling. But I had not really come to terms with material life in the same way. Something had seriously shifted at that point. And it was pretty short order that I had the calling to get out of town and pursue something a little bit different. So I maintained my presence in New York City and was working there practically full time. But I got a small house on the upper Delaware River. And I know it sounds corny. I literally sat on a rock by the river, developing a meditation practice for a number of years. And I had I had a blog that I was posting illustration and design work on. And I started spontaneously writing these kind of spiritual essays. And they, out of nowhere, caught on. And I started getting approached by different sites that had spiritual writings and stuff like that. I'm like, I Gaia.com and stuff like that, contacted me, and I started writing for those people. And after a few years of deepening my meditation practice, I just started to spontaneously channel, in a way, the first book. And it just happened within a few weeks. And I Googled spiritual publishers in Brooklyn, and a company came up, and I sent them my manuscript, and the publisher invited me to lunch the day after he got it. And he said, I'm not publishing it, but I know somebody who probably will. And that's how I ended up getting my first deal with Conari Press, Red Wheel Wiser, for the first book, How to Survive Life and Death. So it all happened very, very magically. But during that period...
But not, right?
No, it had been a long time, and a lot,
yeah. It's so, this is fascinating. I love these stories because, one, it was like the universe was working so hard to try to get your attention, right? And you had to die 3 times.
Yes.
For it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, at what point, was it in these meditations that you started to remember the previous experiences? And did you integrate them? Like, what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, that's kind of what it looked like. Well, in meditation, which I relate a lot to near-death experience, I think that a lot of the same kinds of certainly sensations or understandings, realizations are made in meditation. The meditation breaks down the sense of who you are materially. Like I said, that had stopped working for me. And so I think I was naturally guided towards meditation as a means of discovering what else there was to my life. The things that were holding me back from these realizations were who I was supposed to be, what I supposedly knew for sure, what people expected of me, all of these kinds of material considerations that then became pretty meaningless to me. Mm. And as I sat in meditation, I had the whole first near-death experience just happen again for me. Kind of like in my second NDE where I had the box of time. It's like it just flooded into me. That's right. I had been there. That had happened. That is what I remember having happened. And boom, then they cascaded. I cascaded right down the line, and they all rushed back into me. And at that point, I was so open and so teachable and so connected to a lot of reading that I'd been doing of scripture and physics and philosophy and things I'd never been really that interested in before, that I became totally dedicated to in many ways. It just all fit together suddenly. Mm-hmm. And I realized that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye, and that I had an opportunity to communicate it. And so without any real design on it, like I said, I kind of spontaneously started to produce this written material. And in preparation for talking to you, I was reading some of my second book last night, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. And I found myself thinking, wow, this person is really good. I wonder where they came up with this stuff. This is amazing. Because in many ways, I don't really remember exactly the process of putting all of that down. And so I realized that I am serving now to some degree as a channel. Mm-hmm. And like I said, if we're alive before we're born and we're alive after we die, body, no body, what's the difference? I'm here talking to you right now. And I'm able to communicate to you these kinds of lessons that I learned, the kinds of principles that I consider to be sort of ladders to heaven, like honesty and humility and kindness and forgiveness and compassion and service. These things that you'll find over and over again in every discipline, spiritual discipline that there is. And, I'm in a place where I can communicate all of that. I live there pretty much now all the time.
That was what I was going to ask before because I do want to get into some of the book and what you talk about, but what does the life look like now, knowing what you know, having had these lived experiences? What does it look like to be in the world that is focused on oftentimes material things, success, these qualities of achievement versus
Right.
qualities of soul?
Right. Well, clearly we have a calling, we have a purpose. Like I learned in my third near-death experience, I had to come back and sort of complete those circles and stuff. And you don't realize that you're starting the circle earlier in life until you come back around. It's like, oh, here's where I started that one a long time ago, kind of a thing. But I recognize in retrospect that I'm not the obviously physically the person that I was. My experience of life is not very different than it was when I was a lot younger. I just am unfortunately an older and more decrepit body than I used to be. So I'm not that. I'm not that physical self. I'm not the things that I thought I did, the person I thought I was professionally, for example, because that changed over and over in my life. Nor am I the relationships that I based my life on at different times, because they have come and gone. And relationships have passed, and people have passed away in my life. And so, what am I if I am not those things? I'm tied to something much deeper and much more profound that underlies and supports and enlivens and energizes everything else. And so I generally am experiencing life as these forms of expressions of consciousness through the different forms of life. It's people, the way that people behave, the things that people do, the stuff that I needed to do to express myself, the ways the collective operates in the world, the nature of our relationship to the natural world. I have that kind of perspective that I got in the first near-death experience is a real part of my everyday life now, so that sometimes I'm able to just completely let go of it all and just allow it to be whatever it is. And other times I can see I have to enter into the nuts and bolts here and focus on this, because my home insurance is about to lapse, and I need to pay that bill and that kind of stuff. So it's pretty conceptual in a way.
So, well, yeah, I think you're the part of the book that stood out to me, the presence that lasts, because I think it's exactly what you're speaking to, is that you can be in the moment of like those blissful, joyful, pure, what I feel like are soul moments where we're totally aligned with the essence of who we are. And then you have to pay your bills. Like, right? Isn't that that's like the famous quote, like about transcendent experiences. And then I had to do the laundry.
Right. Yeah. Chopping wood, carrying water.
Yeah.
I like to put it in the form of a kind of equation that a lot of people live by, especially people that end up on this path, kind of that are inspired by near-death experiences, who may have had one themselves.
Or I would say, for me, any spiritual transformative experience, because that was what opened me up.
Any of them. Then this realization that there's like a material life and a spiritual aspect too. It's always kind of a balance that you're dealing with or struggling with. And a lot of people will imagine it as being, like 90% reality and then 10% spiritual transcendence and connection, kind of, And I like to suggest to people that they reverse that equation. and that you live 90% of the time as a spiritual being who is visiting this life and observing all of these forms, expressing a greater consciousness, and having all these opportunities, all these doors open, all these relationships and wonderful experiential stuff going on. And then 10% of the time, you got to deal with the laundry and with the bills, and you will end up being much more effective in that 10% of the time. You can get everything done in that 10% of the time. I used to fight with everything. I wouldn't want to open a certain piece of mail because I didn't want to know what it said, that kind of stuff. And so the reversal of that equation, where you allow yourself to live as a spiritual being 90% of the time, and then focus that 10% on the nuts and bolts and unfortunate realities of our material existence.
So can you fully operationalize that for me? So what does that actually look like?
That actually looks like living in the present moment, knowing that everything is okay and that you're fine, and that all the evidence of your life supports that supposition, that everything's going just fine and you're all right, unless something terrible is happening with you, and then you're laying there with something terrible happening with you, and you likewise recognize, this is where I am right now, and it's okay. And when you're going through hell, keep going, because it'll get better. It's a frequency, right? So when you're in the moment and these things arise in your life, you can immediately recognize that you have dealt with this kind of stuff before and you've gotten through it fine. And most of the time it has come and gone without any real consequence. And possibly you really learned something important from it. So the things that you fear may not actually even be things to fear. If you stay present in this moment, you can just look at them as they are, what it means, how you can best show up to deal with them, and then apply yourself to that. And they come and go. They go past you. You come out on the other side. And as long as you're living in this moment where we create our karma, or we address our karma in this moment, you're fine. You're okay. I heard somebody once at a conference I was at, another speaker, who said something I loved, and I steal it from him all the time, which is, if you get tired of paddling upstream, turn around. And just hold your oar up and go. And the river will take you.
And that sounds like what happened after your third near-death experience, right?
Yeah, that's pretty
much.
You
turned around and then everything opened up for you.
Well, incredibly, because it's so difficult to imagine that this is a life of imagination and of this limitless potential, and that by not doing anything, by not making it happen, it will happen. That seems, it's like, what was that? Manifesting your own reality and stuff. And there's an aspect of that I really believe in. But it also has to do with just the simple practice of faith that I am part of this bigger thing that is carrying me, and it is showing me what I need to know, what I need to do, that my purpose in life often has to do with what I can do for the people that I love and what people want me to do. People wanted me to draw pictures, so I drew pictures, that kind of thing. And so you open up into this world of potential, and then it starts to transpire if you're present for it. If you're present for it, you're allowing for it. You're not trying to control, I like to say the degree to which you try to control things is proportional to the amount of suffering you create for yourself and for others around you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What would you say for you? It sounds like a lot of people who've had near-death experiences open up psychically. it sounds like for you, that experience was through channeling. Would you say that? Or have you had other like psychic experiences, like any precognitions or any abilities to connect with disembodied entities, spirit guides, anything like that?
Yeah, well, I can almost always tell when the Yankees are going to lose again.
Isn't that
Yeah, I wouldn't really call that precognition.
right?
That may just be experience.
Right.
You know something, Amy, in a way, I'm there kind of all the time. When I meet people, I allow them to express what they need to be expressing. It's not necessarily what I first see on the outside. In a way, there's a psychic a relationship that occurs there. When I look at the overall state of the world, it's kind of obvious sometimes. The scales sort of fall away, and it's pretty clear that, for example, we're mismanaging the natural world and we're creating a situation that's going to cause major problems, as it is already for humankind.
And as a result of mismanaging the natural world, it's impacting us on a physical level.
Yeah. I have a relationship with the angel who sat on my shoulder. And in meditation or in personal prayer, that's someplace I go. So I have spirit guides and angels, as it were.
Does your guardian angel have a name?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when I met my wife now 17 years, she was a Reiki master, and I'd never heard of Reiki. And so I had a session with her, and I didn't know what to expect at all. And when she started laying her hands, or just, Reiki is just this energy transference kind of a thing, I went essentially into an astral plane. I went into a trance. And I was, this sounds so corny, but it's really amazing. I was flying above the clouds, like you do when you're above the clouds, and then the clouds opened up, and I flew down into this green place, this gorgeous, like a country estate kind of a thing, with a nice big old house, kind of a Victorian house, places like I had been to in the East, not far from my river cottage and stuff. And on the porch was my Aunt Ruth, who had been very important to me in my childhood, and at whose bedside I'd been when she passed. And there was another woman with her, and she introduced her to me as being Anne, who had been the angel that had been with me all those times. Now, again, if this is a quantum reality where the observer is essentially manufacturing their own reality, I manufactured that, and I now have Anne in my life as a talking person that I can hear when I allow myself to enter into that. And I can hear my Aunt Ruth, and I really, people who pass that are important to me, I can sit and open my heart and enter into a space where their voices start to come to me. And I know it's them because they say things like they would say, not like I would. And lots of times it's a lot smarter than I'm capable of. Or funnier.
It does seem when that wisdom comes through, you're like, wow, that's profound.
Yeah. And so we can connect to this wellspring of intuitive intelligence that's there. And I am capable always of tuning into that to some degree. And because also I trust it. I have faith in it. I allow my imagination to enter and flesh it out fully and bring it to a place in me that I can use, and that hopefully improves my relationship with others and with my life. So, yes, I guess is the short answer to being able to have channeled or have had sort of transpersonal experiences or psychic experiences. I don't call myself a medium or a psychic, and I don't purport to be able to sit down with you and do that for you so much. To me, it's about experiencing this life and addressing what I have before me in this life, whether you need to move or change jobs or deal with something difficult, that's really where I kind of put my focus these days, is how I can be of service a lot of the time, rather than like I don't do that many conferences or speaking engagements and stuff so much anymore, because I find that my life itself is pretty demanding along those lines. And my experience of heaven was that there was no ambition in heaven. So just allowing your life to be what it is and to show you where you need to be for it, and opening knocking down as many obstacles to love, and allowing as much of that intuitive intelligence to enter you as possible is a full-time job, pretty much.
It's so interesting that you're saying this, because I was talking with I don't know what I would call her. She was my professor who encouraged me on this path. She's come back into my life as kind of a mentor at this stage of what feels like a transition for me. And she was talking about a healer she worked with who just said he's done working with other people, and that the focus is going to be on healing himself, because in healing himself, that heals the world in some way. And I was like, wow,
Right.
that is something.
Well, really philosophically, in terms of near-death experience, a lesson that I learned is that I'm not alive in space and time, but space and time is alive in me. And when I'm working with myself to improve myself, I am working with others, because as soon as I engage with somebody else, the same things come directly into play, and I'm open to them in the same way. I like working with other people, and I used to sort of solicit it a little bit more maybe than I do, but I'm available on my blog site, and you can always find out how to contact me, and people contact me with some regularity, and I'll work a few times with them or regularly with them, and we just have phone calls and talk about what's going on and how we can deal with it and stuff like that, and we help each other that way. So that's part of living my life.
And there's probably just a healing in being in presence with your energy, right? That different level of vibration by which you are currently in is healing in its own right.
I hope so. I try. I think that it's probably the biggest part of that is being able to separate yourself from those sort of material demands that you got to make up your mind about something, or that you're reacting to something that's happened to you that's not fair, or something like that. And I'm in a place where hopefully I can communicate to people that that's okay. You experienced that. Go through it. Stay in touch with who you are fundamentally, authentically underneath that. That's going to come and go. All that stuff's going to go past you. This too shall pass, right? And I hopefully can communicate that to people so that they can realize it in their own life. And so that when something like this starts to happen again, it's like, well, what am I bringing to this that's making it happen this way again? Do I see a pattern in my life here? That kind of thing. And maintaining that kind of spiritual perspective that the first near-death experience gave me, and that kind of presence in the moment where I can do something about it, actually, that my second one gave me. And then the realization that there is some purpose here that may be greater than I understand, that I have a role to play here, whether it's about the spiritual stewardship of the world, of nature, or the personal purposes that I have of closing up those circles in my life, of being there for my mother who was there for me, showing up for friends in a certain way, or making myself available to a complete stranger whose situation I get. I've been there.
Well, Robert, if people are interested in learning about you, your beautiful work, 2 books that I love, How to Survive Life and Death and How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying, where can they find you?
At robertkopecky.blogspot.com is a good place. I haven't posted any recent essays, but I'm constantly curating that site, and it has links to get in touch with me and links to get the books too, if you're interested in that. So that's a good place.
Well, thank you so much today for this really enlightening and beautiful interview. I'm so excited to share this with everybody. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Amy. It's been a real privilege, and you're a joy to talk to. And, hang in there. Everything's going to work out just fine. I know you're on the right path. Thank you for your work that you're doing.
Love it. Thank you. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.